Martin Brossman on being alert.
Yes.
Alerts are popular.
What's happening? Hey folks, great to be here. I came up with this morning, and I was thinking of stories from my life that would be possibly interesting. And one of the key moments was when a friend, when I was about, it might have been 15, 20 years ago, said, "I think you're ADD." And I said, "No, I'm not. My mother told me I'm dyslexic, but I'm not ADD." And I thought, well, she must be true. And then the friend said, "Why don't you just go get tested? You've got insurance." That was back when insurance actually covered some things. "You've got insurance, why don't you get tested?" And I went to this person and got tested. And when he sat down after the test to go over it, he said, "How have you ever held a job? You're off the charts ADD." That's all I remember. I thought, this is terrible. What's the solution? And he said, "Well, you can take Ritalin or the other things." And I was really reluctant to medication, if at all possible. And so I tried it for a while and it helped, but I didn't like it. And I really had been studying what was my experience of this thing called ADD. Let's take away the label. And I really wanted to dig underneath what it was. Well, my experience was I had a problem keeping my attention on things. And I remember when I almost lost my job at IBM years ago, I realized I need to learn how to control my attention. And when I focus and become highly focused for periods of time, I'd almost want to throw up. So there was a visceral experience of trying to control my attention. Now I came up with lots of creative ideas easily, but the experience of being focused seemed to be something I didn't have access to. So I started studying what is focused, what does being present as a human being actually mean, and I found, I wanted to write it down so I didn't miss it, that beta in the brain from 14 hertz to 30 is highly alert and focused. So I found someone who did biofeedback work with the brain, and they hooked me up and they said, you kind of drop in and out of a sleep state very easily. And I thought, well, how do you train to do that differently? And he had a machine where you could start training to do this, and I began training myself in these sessions with him on what does being focused be, because I realized when people said be focused, I went, I don't have a visceral experience in my body of even what that means. I don't know what it is. I don't want anyone to know I don't know what it is, because I don't want to look stupider than I feel already. So in training this, I started to experience something. When the dial said focus, I attempted to notice the experience in my body. And what I noticed is there was a tipping point where I realized I got focus. And it's hard to describe, but it's like learning to ride a bicycle. Do you all remember the time when you just learned to ride a bicycle and you got balance? You know, it's a distinction you get. And it's like you don't forget. I went, oh my God. I really have not been aware of what focus was. I now know what focus is. And I remember getting permission. He rented out a machine, so I practiced it on a daily basis. And it was gross. You had to put these electrolyte goo on your head and little electrodes, and it was a mess to get off. But I really was determined to anchor in the experience of what is focus. What is now? What does it mean to really be here? And that I didn't have a visceral, kinesthetic experience of being here. The funny thing about it is after going back to the doctor and sitting in his lab and getting what focus was, I looked over at him and realized he was ADD and had no ability to be focused himself, and I needed to stop paying this guy who couldn't even pay attention, and it was time to leave working with him. So that led to me understanding the idea of focus. Now, getting back to the Ritalin and the others, I'm all for people doing what works, but I really did not want to be on medication if it wasn't possible. So what I did learn is that when I had exercise and when I had good nutrition and meditated, that those three things seemed to give me good focus, along with something interesting, full spectrum lights. Full spectrum lights seemed to give me a boost in focus, and sometimes listening to something while I was studying. So there's actually an app that lets you listen to the sounds of a coffee shop. Yes, I think I'll look it up, but I think it's easy to find. And it's that background chatter in a coffee shop. And what I've learned is often having that on will let me be more focused. So these were some of my lessons, and my interest is, what if the phenomenon of learning challenges and ADD is more of a human condition of responding to the intensity of the world, and some of us choose to not be present as a defense mechanism. And it's not conscious, but it's a choice that we made as a child. And how I realized this is after doing all this work, I was sitting down at my parents' table. And I noticed that my father, when things were emotionally uncomfortable, distracted himself by getting up and moving around. My mother, when things were uncomfortable in topics, she actually distracted herself by changing the topics. And I went, what a brilliant thing for a little child to do that would make it so he'd never be found out. I will shift my attention when things get uncomfortable. And when this was a perfect strategy of a child that then led to being this way in life. And that's where I get to the simple concept in my speech of being more than yourself. Because I had a child controlling my attention. And until I learned more as an adult to get control over it, the child was running the bus. And that's what I learned about being present, the topic today. Thanks very much.
Thank you all. Another invigorating speech.